Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. I'm working on another pair of my Founder's Day socks. The wide striped pattern is made with yarn leftovers I found in my stash one day, not self-striping yarn. If you have ever knit wide stripes like this in the round, you are probably well aware of that funny little jog that can happen at the color change. This little jog occurs because we're not really knitting true rounds or layers that stack one on top of the other. Even though we call it knitting in the round, we're really working in a spring-like spiral. So, how can we minimize that funny little stair step when we change colors? The method I'm going to show you today works well for wider stripes, like the ones I'm making in these socks. However, I'll include links in the video description to a pair of tutorials that offer solutions when you're knitting narrower stripes. Let's get started. Before we get to our socks, I've knit up a small little swatch so we can take a closer look at the jog. When I made my first color change between the blue and the white, I didn't do anything special. I worked around to the end of the round in blue, then I started the first stitch of my next round in white. Doing that creates two problems. First, you can clearly see this little jog or stair step at the color change. Second, if I slightly stretch out the fabric from the back, you can see that there is a little gap or hole right here between the stitches. At my next color change, I used a popular trick to minimize the jog. I changed colors between the white and blue just like before, by finishing the first round in one color and then starting the first stitch of the next round in the next color. The difference is that this time I slipped the first stitch of the second round. This jog mostly disappears, and it's because you have this one elongated stitch here at the beginning of the round that really covers two rounds of knitting. But again, if I stretch out this fabric from the back just slightly, you can see that there's a hole there in between my stitches. At my final color change, I slipped the first stitch of the second round, just like before, which minimizes the jog that would happen right here. But instead of working to the last stitch before the color change with just the old color, I worked this stitch with both colors. Not only does it minimize this jog that would happen right here, it also makes that gap between the stitches disappear. Let's take a look at how it's done. For the neatest color transition that minimizes the jog and closes the gap, knit to one stitch before the color change. The final stitch of the round is knit with both the old and the new color. So I've already cut my yarn tail, so it's just long enough to weave in later. I'm going to insert my needle knitwise, set things up, and wrap my needle like I'm going to knit it. But before I pull the yarn through, I'm also going to take my new color. Again, I'm going to leave a tail here that's long enough to weave in later. And then I will also wrap it around the needle as if to knit. I'm going to hold both of those together and then pull the stitch through. So I have the old yarn and then the new yarn. Then I'm only going to use the new yarn to knit the next round of my sock. And I'll just leave the tail of the old yarn dangling there as I knit around. The last stitch of the previous round was knit with both yarns, so I have 2 loops emerging from that same lower stitch. We want to work those 2 loops together, sort of like a decrease. Since this stitch technically was the last stitch of the old color, my red, I want to make sure that the old color lays over the top of the new color. So I can do that by either working a slip slip knit or a slip knit pass. Both will give pretty much the same results. I generally prefer to do a slip knit pass, so that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm going to slip the first loop knitwise. I'll knit the second loop and then pass the slipped loop over the top of the new stitch I just made. And you can see that the old color lays over the top of the new color. You might also notice that those loops elongated quite a bit when I made my decrease, and there's a reason for that. Those stitches aren't particularly anchored well. They both are right along the yarn tail here. So just to tighten things up and make sure that I have a nice even tension before I go on, I'm just going to snug up those yarn tails a little bit. Now you can see better how that red stitch lays over the top of the white one, so it's hidden. And that closed up the little hole that could possibly form. Now I need to minimize the jog. And to do that, after I move my marker, when I get to the beginning of the round, all I'm going to do is slip the first stitch of the second round purlwise. And then I can finish knitting my wide stripe like normal until I get to the next color change. Of course, when my sock is complete, I'm going to need to go back and weave in these yarn tails like normal. But I won't have to pull or knot the tails to close up any gaps, and the jog at the color changes will be virtually invisible. I hope you enjoyed learning what I think is the neatest way to create a jogless join when you're knitting wide stripes in the round. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends. If you'd like to support our ongoing tutorial videos or try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechillydog.com and look for the Founders Day socks. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!